Villains. Yes, we all know villains. They're the big baddies who will face the heroes, give them hurdles and obstacles to overcome. There's a good villain, the one who makes us question our morals because sometimes their objective makes sense. They are layered, and then there are villains who just happen to be there. Throughout watching movies and TV shows and sometimes play video games, I've observed an interesting pattern on what makes a good villain. And it's not just about making one villain, it's about creating multiple villains.
Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy. But the first time somebody told me that,
I picked three given their similarities, one from a TV show, one from a movie trilogy, and one from a game, and observe how they created everlasting and iconic villains in the history of entertainment.
Oh, fuck you!
What is thy bidding, my master?
There is a great disturbance in the force.
What is seen is a dynamic of who is the higher evil. Sometimes the one kneeling down is the follower, who listens and acts what the higher evil is told. I will call the follower as the pawn villain, not the shrimp, and the higher evil as the pillar villain. Together, they could create this layered, multifaceted storytelling to make an interesting character, not just for the heroes but also for its adversaries.
Destroy you. Luke, you do not yet realize your importance. You have only begun to discover your power. Join me, and I will complete your training. With our
The evilness of the pawn villain is influenced by the pillar villain. Their values align with their masters, and most of the time, the pillar villain creates the pawn to be the thing that they are. And as pawns, they protect their masters and deliver what they're being
Yeah, he
told.
told me about Voss's boss, Hoyt.
Hoyt Volka. Stay away from him, Jason. I'm sick. You think Voss is crazy?
What?
All the evil on the island, it comes from Hoyt. He took Voss's mind away from him. It is he who pulls the strings.
Wow. Okay.
Like that. I ensure our slaves come from around the globe, just like that little contact lens. My product.
Pawn villain is not just a pawn villain for the higher evil. They have their own goals, own objectives, and a thing to prove. They are the ones who will constantly face our heroes and our protagonists, giving them a headache everything they can, while the pillar villain is just behind the picture, lurking in the shadows. To have a better understanding of how they are placed within a story, here is a simple timeline explaining how. And as you can see here, this is the hero. As you can see here, the pawn villain moves like a pawn. They are commonly moved first in the story and is introduced first. They appear then the pillar villain, introducing them as hurdle to the protagonist, crushing them at every chance they get. With every act, the pawn villain runs back nearer and nearer to the pillar villain. In some stories, another pawn villain emerges, preferably greater and has more significance with the plot. As for the pillar villain, the hero never meets them nor faces them. but is only aware of them through snippets of dialogue, backstories, and mentions. They can only meet at the very end where the great battle unfolds. The unawareness of the heroes gives us tension and suspense. Us viewers create many scenarios of how they will face each other. This builds up and breaks, creating one of the most iconic and remembered fight scenes in recent memory. What is so great about this structure is that the storytellers create more room for the villains to be more than just villains, especially pawn villains. Unlike the pillar villain whose only intentions were to be bad, complete black, no light, even gray, pawn villains are just much more different than pillar villains. They aren't just plain bad guys, they have reasons, and as viewers, we notice these reasons and came to understand. They are much more memorable because they're the ones most beloved, because they're the ones paid much more attention from the writers. Even sometimes, a villain can become a hero, and the reason for that is just pure writing genius, collaboration, and planning. Now, I would like to point out that there are obviously variations. It's not all about what's in the playbook. There are also others who broke the rules and conventions, stereotypes, and many more. And one of them is Arcane. And I know many YouTubers have tackled this already, but I just want to share mine because it's really one of the most compelling animated stories I've seen in a long time. So, I consider Arcane as a story that has multiple villains, Silco being the pillar villain, and you might hate me for this, Jinx as the pawn villain. Jinx' arc is in reverse. Instead of bad turning into good, she's good turning into bad. But I'm not talking about Jinx. I'm talking about Silco. Because you see, as I previously spoke earlier about the pillar villains, just waits until the very last act, giving them less personality and characterization than the pawn villains, because their ultimate use is just to give a bang of an ending for the protagonist. Well, Silco is different. In just probably 7 to 9 minutes or less, they give him enough for us to understand why he do what he does. And like most of the characters in Arcane, he is gray. Probably the grayest of them all. And this whole process is just a product of good collaboration, writing plan in the writer's room, and very trustworthy collaborators. It doesn't really matter if you create multiple villains to make your story great. There are tons of great stories out there who used only one villain and still end up doing it fantastically. What matters is that you create a great story with great characters. So, if you're an inspiring writer or just wants to write something for pastime, try using this structure and see what you're able to make out of it. I mean, hell, that's what storytelling is for.